Hello, everybody. Hello, Bottomized Logan back. Sorry for the jank audio. I'm not in my apartment yet, so I'm recording on my laptop holding my microphone. Other than that, the Switch has a couple controversies that have popped up pre-launch, so let's get into them. There are some good, some bad, some that I understand, some that I don't, but overall, let's take a look and see what the Switch 2 pre-launch controversies are. And first up, it's the one that everybody's been complaining about. $80 games are just straight up a scam. The only exception I will make this generation is for Xenoblade 4 or whatever Monolith Soft makes, because I am a filthy shill for that franchise and that company. They make amazing games. But other than that, I don't think $80 games should have ever been a thing. I don't think they should have ever caught on. Companies already nickel and dime you with microtransactions, and for Nintendo to be the one to kick this into gear is crazy. With that being said, the only way I will accept $80 games is if they don't have season passes. If this game, Mario Kart World, comes out and it gets constant free content, then I can accept it being $80. Like if we're getting new maps, new characters, all of that, for $80, I could see myself accepting that. Or if the developers are getting paid more. But if this is just to line the pockets of some investors or some suits at Nintendo, I don't believe $80 games are acceptable. And now that Nintendo does it, Microsoft thinks it's fully acceptable to price their games at 80. Hey Microsoft, have you tried releasing anything? Big fan of Phil Spencer, big fan of what he's doing, but with the $80 game comment, not a fan of that. So I will say, like everything else in this video, if you don't like $80 games, vote with your wallet. I'm buying the bundle of Mario Kart World, so I am officially contributing to those sales numbers. I understand. But most games you can probably find secondhand used for a lot cheaper than 80. That's all I had to say on that topic. Now, the next big one that everybody is complaining about, guess what it is? Game key cards. Now, I don't hate game key cards, and let me explain. First off, for those who don't know, they're basically a digital file on the cartridge that you put in, and it'll just let you download the game. There's no game file actually on the cartridge. And while I don't like these, I don't hate them. And let me explain. First off, I'm not defending corporate greed. I think if a game's going to be full price, such as Hitman, Star Wars Outlaws, and Street Fighter 6, they should all be on a 64 gigabyte cartridge because those companies are massive and they can afford it. However, I can understand why some games don't use 64 gigabyte cartridges. In a leak by Arc System Works, they got hacked. It is apparently $16 per 64 gigabyte cartridge. So budget titles such as Yakuza 0, Bravely Default, Puyo Puyo Tetris 2, Sonic X Shadows Generations, I can understand why those games are not on a 64 gigabyte cartridge because that cost would be passed on to the consumer. At the end of the day, they're running a business. And while I don't think it's okay, they should definitely at least offer a full physical. I understand why they're not. Because Nintendo is only offering game key cards and 64 gigabyte cartridges as of what we know right now. Because I imagine a lot of these smaller titles would be on cartridge if not. Now, the benefit of these and why I'm actually going to collect them is because, one, you can still trade them around like a physical game. It's not tied to your account. Two, you can still play them online after you download them. And three, these games are much more likely to go on a deep, deep discount. Games like Dragon Quest III HD Remake has been out for maybe 6 months now, and it's still $60 on the eShop. Never got a sale. You can find it at Walmart, Amazon, GameStop for $39.99. Physical games will still get deeper sales than digital, which is why I think game key cards are better than if we only had the digital option. Granted, there is another reason I think they introduced these game key cards, and that is because with the Nintendo Switch being as powerful as it is, and being as comparable to modern systems as it is, we get into games like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. The reason why I pick out Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and not Final Fantasy VII Remake is because of a comment made by Naoki Hamaguchi. He states, I felt the Switch 2 would have enough power to run the FF7 Remake series I was creating. This means they intend to, if the remake sells well enough, to bring over Rebirth and Part 3. Rebirth itself on PS5 is 145 gigabytes. Even compressed down, I highly doubt they are going to get it below 70 onto a 64 gigabyte cartridge, which means these later games coming later in the Switch life span will not fit on a 64 gigabyte cartridge unless they decide to do 128 gigabyte cartridges. And if companies don't even want to shell out the $16 for a 64 gigabyte cartridge, I highly doubt they are going to shell out for a 128 gigabyte cartridge. This isn't even stating other games that are going to get ported to the Switch 2 as the lifespan goes on. Games are getting bigger and bigger and bigger every single year, which isn't a good thing. I'm not team defense. I'm just saying these companies want shelf space and Nintendo wants to sell third-party games. So even if it's a game keycard and you have to install these games, they still want them on the shelf. They want it for the casual gamers who aren't going to follow Switch 2 news. They want it for the people who are going to see, oh, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth or Part 3 on Nintendo Switch 2. I'll pick that up because, in all honesty, casual gamers aren't going to care. So what exactly can we do? What we can do is buy games that come fully on cartridge. Reward the developers that shell out the extra cash in a world where they can prioritize profits. They went against the grain and decided to use these more expensive cartridges because they knew their loyal fan bases would pay. So if we buy these games, we're showing companies like Square Enix, we will pay up for the 64 gigabyte cartridges. If games like Final Fantasy VII Remake don't sell well, and games like Cyberpunk 2077, Story of Seasons, Daemon X Machina, and Rune Factory all sell really well, and we're like, hey, it's because they're on cartridge, we like collecting them, then more companies will fall in line and they will start to put their games on 64 gigabyte cartridges if they can. Hopefully, later in the life, Nintendo actually offers smaller cartridge sizes for indie games, so we actually can get indie games on cartridge without having to download them. But who knows? With the way these mini SSDs work in the cartridges, maybe 64 gigabytes is the lowest they can go, other than just having a download file on like a 1 gigabyte cartridge. So again, not defending corporate greed. A lot of these game keycards I will most likely either buy secondhand or on sale, minus a few titles I really want to play, but those games will most likely be bought at launch, so I can't really get those used at the moment. However, vote with your wallets, make it heard. And the last thing I gotta say about this is, why did Nintendo make the console only have 256 gigabytes of internal storage? That's kind of crazy. They should have at least included 512 gigabytes if they were going to make you download the majority of games onto the system, but that's a whole nother argument. And speaking of specifications of the system, we're actually going to get into tech specs next, because I believe the Nintendo Switch 2 is very fairly priced for what it is, comparable to even the best PC handhelds out there. And this has an edge that others don't, for games being optimized specifically for the Nintendo Switch 2. So let's get into why I think it's worth it. First off, I have owned several PC handhelds, some ranging from $650 with the Steam Deck to even like $1,200 with the GPD-1 Max 2. And one thing that you will see with all of these PC handhelds is that they are comparable, even the newest Ryzen chips are comparable to a GTX 6050M. However, they can't leverage DLSS, they don't have FSR4, and they are much more expensive than a Nintendo console. Now, the Nintendo Switch 2 has 9 gigabytes of available RAM for developers to use, which means that games that run on the Series S should run on the Nintendo Switch 2, and the most comparable graphics card to the Nintendo Switch 2 is the GTX 2050 Mobile, which has DLSS, more cores, and also an advantage over the GTX 1650. Now, you can't exactly do a one-to-one comparison with these devices, as one is a Nintendo console with games specifically optimized for it, and another is a PC handheld that's just running the Windows version, or a Windows version ran through a compatibilityware like Proton. But the point still stands. This console is $450, and it is going to run next-generation games, even if they have to use DLSS. And it's not just DLSS that they have. They also have DLAA, which is native but with anti-aliasing, and they have DLSS that can go up and down dynamically. I have no doubt in my mind that some of these third-party games that are very well optimized will outperform some of these PC handhelds just because of the optimization tricks and the fact that, like it or not, DLSS is the best upscaler out there. FSR4 is coming close, but again, not available on mobile chips yet, which means that as of right now, the Nintendo Switch 2 will be the easiest way to play some of these third-party games on a handheld, because with the PC handhelds, you have to go in, you have to tweak them, you have to make sure that they run. And honestly, no offense to my casual fans out there, I don't think y'all want to do all that. Sometimes I don't even want to do all that. And I've owned 3 of them. So that's the main thing I think the Nintendo Switch 2's audience is for. It is for people who want to play third-party games on the go without having to tweak them, people who love Nintendo exclusives, people who cover Nintendo exclusives, or people who just want to play Nintendo games. Because in reality, I don't think you're going to get a lot of the PC handhelds like the Steam Deck for life guys to buy a Switch 2, and I don't think the Switch 2 audience overlaps with the Steam Deck very much. I love handhelds, so it overlaps for me and it overlaps for some others, but genuinely, I think this is targeting casuals or people who aren't hardcore about handheld gaming. But, rant aside, I hope you guys all enjoyed the video. These were just my opinions on the Nintendo Switch 2 and some of the controversies that popped up pre-launch. Like, subscribe, all that jazz, unless you disliked it, in which case, leave a dislike. Honestly, fair enough. We're all allowed to have our own opinions, and these were just mine. But with that being said, lobotomized Logan out.